There is this incredibly common experience that's playing out across the country right now.
Mhm.
You're walking down your street, or maybe you're locking up your business for the night, and you can't shake this and this underlying feeling that your neighborhood is just less safe than it used to be.
Yeah.
Like you see the broken glass on the curb from a car break-in,
Right.
or you hear the local discussions about high-risk offenders being released pre-trial.
Yeah.
Or you go to the pharmacy and you see everyday items locked up behind plexiglass.
Right. The deodorant and the toothpaste. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you go home and you turn on the evening news,
Yeah.
and there's a politician or maybe a police chief pointing to this pristine spreadsheet, confidently declaring that crime is actually dropping to historic lows.
Yeah.
And it's a massive cognitive disconnect.
It really is. It's the friction between your lived reality and the official data. And when that gap between those two things becomes wide enough, it leaves the public wondering if the data is just fundamentally broken or if their own perception is just completely warped by, anecdotes.
Exactly. And that tension is what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. Our mission today is to take a massive stack of sources. So we're looking at structural criminology studies, statistical analyses of bail reform, legal theories on judicial ideology, and even like century-long sociological data on migration.
It's a lot.
It's a ton of material.
Yeah.
But we want to figure out the architecture of this disconnect. We want to understand the realities of how our justice system is shifting, the math of bail reform, the complexities of population growth, and this massive shadowy gap between what happens on the pavement and what actually gets recorded on a government spreadsheet.
Yeah, and it is a complex landscape because to truly map it, we have to look at the entire pipeline of justice.
Right.
From the judges making the appellate rulings at the very top, down to the police officer deciding whether or not to even record an incident on the street.
Right.
All the way to the demographic shifts that are happening in the communities themselves.
Okay, now before we jump into the deep end,
Okay.
I need to state our parameters very clearly for this.
Sure.
In order to analyze this pipeline, this deep dive is going to touch on some highly politically charged concepts.
Very much so.
We are going to evaluate literature on whether courts are shifting left-wing or right-wing. We're going to look at statistics around immigrant crime rates.
Yeah.
And we'll look closely at the political pressures on police departments. So I want to be clear. Our purpose here is never to endorse any political side.
Right, left, right, or center. Yeah.
None of it.
Mm.
Our job is strictly to impartially report, synthesize, and just analyze the ideas and the hard data presented in our source material.
Mm.
We're looking at the math and the sociology. We are not playing politics.
Absolutely.
So with that established, okay, let's unpack this by starting at the very top of the system, which is the judges. Because there is this pervasive public narrative that the mainstream judicial system has taken this massive ideological shift to the left.
Yeah, you hear that constantly.
But when you actually dig into the historical literature, the evolution of how we even define a left-wing court it's just full of irony.
It really is, especially when you look at the historical timeline in the UK,
Right.
which heavily influenced our American legal tradition. So if you go back to the early 20th century, the political left absolutely despised the judiciary.
Right, because of cases like, what was it, the 1901 Taft fail judgment?
Yes.
For those unfamiliar, that was a landmark case where the courts basically decided that a union could be held financially liable for the damages caused by a strike.
Right.
So it was a massive union-bashing judgment.
Huge.
And for decades after that, the Labor Party and the broader political left just viewed judges as these reactionary, out-of-touch conservatives
Yeah.
whose sole function was to preserve the status quo for the wealthy. They were the establishment protectors.
Precisely. And in the 1930s, you had radical left-wing politicians actively complaining that a system based on judge-made common law it just generated endless expense and it insulated the elite.
Wow.
But then you get this massive ideological flip.
Right.
In recent decades, the political left in the UK has largely embraced the courts, primarily by championing frameworks like the Human Rights Act of 1998.
Okay.
They began to utilize the judiciary as a crucial check on executive government power.
Oh, I see.
And as a defender of individual civil liberties.
Well, simultaneously, the political right, which traditionally, revered the institutions of law and order, they grew increasingly hostile to the bench.
Exactly.
You start seeing the rise of the term judicial activism.
Right.
The right begins to argue that judges are overstepping their bounds. And that sort of culminated in those famous tabloid headlines calling judges the enemies of the people.
Right.
When they ruled against conservative policies like the Brexit mechanisms.
Yeah, that 180-degree turn really sets the stage for how we evaluate the courts today.
Yep.
Particularly in the U.S., where the debate over judicial ideology has basically become an arms race of data.
So what do you mean?
Well, the sources detail a long-standing academic debate between two models of judicial behavior. So you have the legal model and the attitudinal model.
Okay.
The legal model is the traditional kind of romantic ideal. It assumes judges are purely objective umpires.
Calling balls and strikes.
Exactly. They look at the facts, look at the precedent, and strictly apply the law. But the attitudinal model, which is heavily validated by modern statistical analysis, it argues that the ideological attitudes and values of the judges,
Their politics.
yeah, essentially their political and social leanings, it argues those pervasively influence their decisions, particularly when the law is ambiguous.
And we aren't just guessing at their political leanings anymore, right? Like the researchers are using these incredibly complex algorithmic tools to measure this stuff now.
They are.
The literature heavily references Martin Quinn scores and DW nominate common space scores.
Yeah.
And just to clarify how those work for people, they don't just look at what a judge says in their confirmation hearing, right?
No.
DW nominate, for example, is this multidimensional scaling method.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it analyzes a judge's spatial voting record over time. So by looking at non-unanimous decisions, the algorithm plots exactly how often a judge agrees or disagrees with their peers.
Right.
So it creates this highly accurate ideological continuum. It's like a math-based political compass test.
Exactly. And when researchers apply these spatial models to the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeals, they find that the political affiliation of a judge, which is typically tracked by the party of the president who appointed them, it influences their decisions in a much wider variety of cases than previously thought.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it is not just the high-profile, highly polarized Supreme Court cases like abortion or capital punishment.
Right, the stuff that makes the news.
Yeah. That partisan gap permeates deeply into routine administrative law, environmental regulations, and crucially for this discussion, criminal procedure.
Okay, but this is where I think we need to carefully define our terms.
Yeah, we do.
Because when an algorithm or a legal coder labels a ruling as liberal or conservative, they aren't talking about broad political platforms, are they?
No.
Like if a judge rules on a complex search and seizure case, the database just needs a binary way to categorize that decision.
That is the absolute crux of the issue. In legal coding, especially when they're building these massive repositories like the Supreme Court database, liberal has a highly specific operational definition.
Okay.
In the area of criminal procedure, a liberal vote almost universally translates to a pro-defendant vote.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. In civil liberties cases, it means a vote for the individual against the government. In economic cases, it usually means pro-government regulation or anti-corporate.
So it's very compartmentalized.
Very. So when the public hears that a court or a justice system is trending liberal, they might envision a holistic political philosophy.
Right.
But in the raw data, it often just boils down to a structural tendency to rule in favor of the criminal defendant over the state prosecution.
Which makes sense for the database to use that shorthand, but measuring a judge's entire worldview that way is inherently flawed. Right. Even the researchers themselves acknowledge that judicial ideology is heavily multidimensional.
Right.
Like a judge might be incredibly conservative on economic regulation, consistently striking down federal agency rules.
Yeah.
But they might hold very liberal pro-defendant views on Fourth Amendment privacy issues regarding, say, digital data or cell phones.
Exactly.
And if you only sample their criminal procedure cases, the algorithm labels them a liberal, which just totally mischaracterizes their broader judicial philosophy.
It does. And furthermore, that data is heavily skewed by the phenomenon of litigant selection.
Right, the strategy of it all.
Yeah, advocacy groups and appellate lawyers are highly strategic.
Oh, yeah.
If they know a particular circuit court leans heavily conservative, they aren't going to risk appealing a borderline pro-defendant case to that court.
Because they don't want to risk setting a disastrous binding precedent in that jurisdiction.
Exactly. So the courts are only ever ruling on a highly filtered, curated list of disputes.
Right.
The most clear-cut cases are settled or abandoned long before they reach an appellate judge, meaning Our data on judicial ideology is based almost entirely on the hardest, most legally ambiguous cases,
That's a huge selection bias.
built into the very architecture of the justice system.
Okay, but let's connect this back to the reality on the street.
Let's do it.
Because measuring this stuff is kind of like trying to guess a sports referee's politics based entirely on which team they call fouls on.
Right.
It's abstract. But the academic data defines a liberal court as a pro-defendant court. That directly explains the public's current anxiety.
It does.
Because if the overarching philosophy of the justice system, from the appellate judges way at the top down to the local magistrates,
Right.
if that shifts toward being more sympathetic to the defendant,
Right.
prioritizing their procedural rights and their freedom
Right.
over the state's power to incarcerate them, the public is going to feel that shift.
Oh, absolutely.
The academic definition of pro-defendant translates into a very real-world consequence,
Yeah.
which is more defendants being released back into the community rather than being held in jail.
Yeah, that ideological shift from the bench inevitably trickles down into tangible structural policy.
Oh.
And there is honestly no better example of a systemic pro-defendant policy shift in recent years than bail reform.
Yeah, bail reform is where the abstract legal theory just hits the pavement hard.
Exactly.
The sources provide this really fascinating, highly detailed case study on Cook County, Illinois.
Which includes Chicago.
Right, Chicago.
Okay.
They implemented a massive bail reform initiative known as General Order 18.8A. And the underlying premise of this was perfectly logical, right?
Yeah.
A justice system shouldn't keep people in a concrete cell before they've even had a trial simply because they don't have the liquid cash to post bail.
Right. The argument was that cash bail penalizes poverty, not dangerousness.
Exactly. So what's fascinating here is how the data played out.
Yeah. So the intention was to decouple wealth from pretrial liberty. So following the order, Cook County vastly increased the number of defendants who were released pretrial.
Right.
And in the immediate aftermath, the original researchers who studied Cook County reform published a highly publicized report declaring the initiative a massive success.
I remember seeing the headlines for that.
Right. They pointed to their statistical models and argued that the rate of new crimes committed by these newly released defendants remained completely stable.
Okay.
Their conclusion was that releasing more people did not compromise public safety.
But then an independent group of researchers looked at that exact same Cook County study. They dug into the methodology and uncovered this glaring, fundamental statistical artifact.
It was a profound methodological error.
Yeah.
It was all regarding the time horizon of the study.
Yeah.
So the original researchers compared two groups: a before cohort of defendants processed prior to General Order 18.8A.
Under the old cash bail rule.
Right. And an after cohort processed under the new lenient rules.
Okay.
But because there was this intense political and academic pressure to publish the findings quickly, the observation windows for the two groups were wildly asymmetric.
Which is crazy for a statistical study.
Mm.
They observed the before group for an average of 243 days while they were out in the community awaiting trial.
Yes.
But they only monitored the after group for an average of 154 days.
Right.
So they essentially gave the pre-reform group over 8 months to potentially reoffend, but gave the post-reform group barely 5 months.
Yeah.
Naturally, the post-reform group committed fewer total crimes during the study period. They literally had 3 fewer months of street time to get into trouble.
It is a classic truncation error. So the new researchers reevaluated the data using standard survival analysis techniques. They mathematically equalized the observation windows by extrapolating the failure rate, so the rate of reoffense, of the after group, over the full 243-day period to match the before group.
Basically putting them on a level playing field mathematically.
Exactly.
And when they equalized the math, that pristine spreadsheet just fell apart.
Completely.
The true data revealed that the original study undercounted the crimes committed by the newly released pretrial defendants by an estimated 1,212 crimes.
Over 1,200 additional crimes committed in a single county by individuals who, under the previous system, would likely have been detained pending trial.
Wow.
And when you factor those undercounted crimes back into the models, the total estimated crimes committed by pretrial releases didn't stay stable at all.
Right.
They jumped by roughly 45% compared to the pre-reform baseline.
A 45% increase in crime volume from this specific population.
Yeah.
And this is the exact root of the cognitive disconnect we talked about in the introduction.
Oh, yeah.
A policymaker will stand at a podium and say, well, the rate of reoffense remains stable at 15%. The policy is a success.
Right.
But the public doesn't live in a world of percentages.
No, they don't.
They live in a world of raw volume. Like 1,200 extra crimes is 1,200 extra broken windows or stolen cars in their neighborhood.
What's fascinating here is the mathematical reality of volume versus rate.
Right, break that down.
Okay, if a jurisdiction traditionally releases 1,000 defendants and 15% reoffend, the community absorbs 150 crimes.
Okay.
If you change the risk assessment rules and release 5,000 defendants and the rate stays perfectly stable at 15%,
Oh, wow.
the community just absorbs 750 crimes. The statistical rate didn't budge, it's still 15%, but the neighborhood experienced 600 additional offenses.
And that's exactly what the public is feeling. Furthermore, the researchers noted something even more concerning in that Cook County data.
Yeah.
Because the sheer volume of crimes jumped by 45%, but the actual number of people released only increased by about 20%.
Yes.
So if the crime increase outpaces the release increase, that strongly implies the system wasn't just releasing more of the same low-level offenders.
Yeah.
They were releasing a more dangerous, crime-prone demographic who mathematically committed crimes at a higher frequency once they were out.
Which perfectly illustrates why the public perception of safety often diverges so sharply from the official narrative. The system is celebrating a stable rate, while the residents are forced to navigate a massive surge in actual crime volume on their streets.
Okay, but this brings us to what I think is the most perplexing contradiction in this entire deep dive.
Okay.
If policies like bail reform are verifiably putting more active offenders back onto the street, and those individuals are committing thousands of extra crimes,
Yeah.
why do the overarching federal statistics like the FBI's uniform crime reporting data, why do they show that national crime rates are steadily dropping?
That is the big question.
Right, how can both realities coexist?
To reconcile that contradiction, we have to explore one of the most vital and frankly unsettling concepts in criminology, which is the dark figure of crime.
The dark figure. That sounds incredibly ominous.
It is. It is the massive hidden iceberg of criminal activity that occurs in the real world, but never makes it into the official governmental ledgers.
Wow. Okay.
And the sources provide a structural funnel that explains exactly how crimes just vanish from the data.
Right, so let's talk about this funnel.
The funnel is staggering. According to comprehensive victimization surveys, out of every 100 crimes that are physically committed, only about 47 are ever reported to the police by the victim or a bystander.
Wait, really? Only 47 out of 100?
Yeah.
So 53% of all crime is immediately invisible.
Gone.
Before the police are even involved, more than half of the reality is erased.
Exactly.
And the reasons for that silence are deeply structural. In cases of gang violence or domestic abuse, the primary driver is the fear of lethal retaliation.
Yeah.
With sexual assaults, there is immense social stigma and, honestly, just the trauma of the investigative process itself.
Yeah, that's huge.
But when we look at property crime and street-level violence, the driving factor for non-reporting is a profound, systemic lack of faith in the police.
Yeah, and the sources cite the Merseyside Crime Survey in the UK as a perfect illustration of this.
I remember that, yeah.
The researchers found this devastating paradox. The inner-city neighborhoods with the highest actual lived experiences of crime had the lowest official rates of reporting.
Wow.
The residents in those areas had developed such deep-seated distrust of the authorities, combined with a cynical realization that the police likely wouldn't solve the crime anyway,
Right.
that they simply stopped calling them.
Which creates a massive institutional blind spot. The most dangerous neighborhoods look statistically safer on paper simply
Yeah.
because the phone has stopped ringing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's move down the funnel. So we have the 47 out of 100 crimes that actually do get reported to dispatch. The sources show that out of those 47, only about 27 are officially recorded as actual crimes by the authorities.
Wait, so out of 100 real crimes, only 27 end up on the spreadsheet.
Yes.
Why does a reported crime not get recorded? If I call the cops, why wouldn't they write it down?
This is where we examine police discretion and the immense bureaucratic pressure of performance metrics.
Oh, boy.
Because police departments are political entities. An individual officer might use their discretion to decide a minor theft is just too trivial to justify 3 hours of paperwork.
Right, they just sort it out on the street.
Effectively, informally resolving the issue, yeah. But more systematically, there is intense, top-down political pressure from mayors and city councils to demonstrate that crime is decreasing under their watch.
Right, and when a bureaucracy is heavily incentivized to produce a specific number, they will find a way to produce it.
They absolutely will.
The sources actually include evidence submitted to the UK Parliament regarding how local police forces categorize incidents. And they found highly suspicious recording patterns. In certain risk-averse precincts, there were unusually high incidences of criminal damage,
Right.
which is officially recorded as a crime, but incredibly low incidences of antisocial behavior, which is merely logged as an incident and doesn't impact the overall crime rate.
Right, or vice versa, depending on what targets they're trying to hit.
Exactly. The parliamentary evidence explicitly warned of a culture of gaming the statistics.
Yeah.
Police departments actively manipulate the categorization of events to meet arbitrary performance targets and basically climb up National League tables.
It's true. If a precinct commander's promotion depends on a 10% reduction in burglaries, you will inevitably see a significant number of attempted burglaries creatively downgraded to trespassing or vandalism in the final report.
It's just an institutional rereading of reality.
Yes.
If a politician demands the crime rate goes down, the police department simply adjusts the definition of the crime to ensure the spreadsheet reflects the demand.
Sociologists who subscribe to the interpretivist approach argue exactly this point.
What's the interpretivist approach?
They argue that official crime statistics, like the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System, the UCR, they are not objective measures of reality.
Okay.
They are a social construction.
Wow.
They measure the behavior of the police and the political priorities of the state, not the actual behavior of criminals.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So is political pressure actually changing the definition of crime to make the stats look better?
Absolutely. And we can actually track the widening of this gap in real time.
How so?
The sources highlight data from Pinkerton comparing the FBI UCR data, which, remember, relies entirely on those heavily filtered police reports.
Right.
They compare that against the National Crime Victimization Survey, or the NCVS.
Right, the NCVS. Now, that bypasses the police entirely, doesn't it?
Completely. It is a massive statistical survey conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics that simply asks a representative sample of citizens, were you the victim of a crime this year?
Just a straight-up survey.
Yeah. Historically, there has always been a gap between the UCR police data and the NCVS victimization data.
Naturally, yeah.
But usually they trend in the same general direction.
Oh, okay.
However, starting around 2019 and peaking massively in 2022, that discrepancy just exploded.
Right.
Yeah. Dr. John Lott's analysis of the Pinkerton data showed that the divergence in the percentage change of violent crimes between the two data sets grew to roughly a 30 percentage point difference.
A 30-point divergence. That isn't a statistical margin of error.
No.
That is two completely different realities occupying the same space. The FBI spreadsheets are telling the public that violent crime is down, while the actual victims are anonymously reporting to the census takers that violent crime has surged.
Exactly.
And if the police aren't formally recording these crimes, they certainly aren't investigating or solving them.
No, they're not. Which triggers the next systemic failure in the pipeline, which is the collapse of deterrence.
Deterrence. Okay, let's talk about that.
The Pinkerton data on police clearance rates is incredibly revealing here. So the clearance rate is the percentage of recorded crimes where the police actually make an arrest and turn the case over to the courts for prosecution.
Right, they clear the case.
Yeah. From 2018 to 2022, clearance rates plummeted across the board.
It just totally dropped off.
Yeah. For total violent crimes, the clearance rate dropped by 4.45%. For property crimes, it dropped by 3.75%.
Which, again, might sound like a small percentage to some people until you apply it to the millions of crimes committed annually.
Millions, yes.
And it becomes truly alarming when you look at the most severe offenses, which historically receive the highest priority and the most investigative resources.
Exactly. The clearance rate for homicides dropped nearly 13% in that 4-year window.
Oh my God, 13%.
Yeah, and aggravated assaults dropped over 10%.
If your chances of getting away with murder go up by 13% in just 48 months, the entire mathematical risk calculation of committing a crime just fundamentally changes.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand the mechanics of why that matters, we look at routine activities theory.
What's that?
This is a criminological theory that posits that for a crime to successfully occur, 3 elements must converge in time and space.
Okay.
You need a motivated offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian.
Okay, so the motivated offender is the individual looking to steal a car.
Right.
The suitable target is the Kia parked on a dark street.
Yeah.
And the capable guardian is a police patrol, an active security camera, or even just an armed citizen.
Exactly. When clearance rates plummet, and when offenders know that bail reform policies ensure rapid pretrial release even if they do get caught, the capable guardian variable functionally drops to zero.
Oh, wow.
Potential offenders perform a rational economic risk calculation.
Right, they aren't stupid.
Exactly. If they know the victim probably won't report the crime, the police likely won't record it, detectives almost certainly won't solve it, and the courts won't hold them.
Then what's stopping them?
Nothing. The deterrence effect is entirely obliterated. The act of committing a crime transitions from a high-risk gamble to a rational, relatively safe option.
It's exactly like an intersection equipped with a broken red light camera.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, like when the city first installs that camera, everyone slams on the brakes. The deterrence is absolute because the enforcement is perceived as guaranteed.
Right, you see the camera, you stop.
But if the neighborhood slowly figures out that the camera's broken, the flash never goes off, the tickets never arrive in the mail, the behavior at that intersection changes completely.
Everyone just runs it.
Running the red light just becomes the new accepted norm. The drivers aren't suddenly more malicious. The systemic guardrails have simply vanished.
And when those guardrails vanish, it creates a cascading, vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Low clearance rates destroy public trust. The public sees that the police are ineffective, so they stop reporting crimes.
Right, which inflates the dark figure.
Exactly, which makes the police look even more obsolete on paper.
And the burden of that risk doesn't just evaporate. It is aggressively shifted onto the innocent bystanders and the law-abiding public.
It is.
If the state is no longer functioning as a capable guardian, individuals and businesses are forced to absorb the cost of their own protection.
Yeah.
That is why you see insurance premiums skyrocketing in certain zip codes, because the insurance companies are pricing in the collapse of deterrence.
Oh, totally.
It is why bystanders are less likely to intervene in a street altercation. They know the system won't protect them from the liability or the physical risk.
It forces the privatization of public safety.
Wow.
Those who can afford to insulate themselves with private security and surveillance will do so, while those who cannot are left to navigate the reality of the dark figure alone.
Okay, so we have established that the volume of crime can skyrocket while the official rates are artificially suppressed.
Right.
We've established that deterrence is collapsing and courts are releasing more individuals pre-trial. Now, let's bring in the final highly debated piece of this puzzle, which is population growth and migration.
Okay, yes.
Because right now, there is an intense public perception that massive demographic shifts, specifically the influx of migrants, are the primary driver behind the crime waves people are feeling in their communities.
It is a highly intuitive connection for the public to make.
Right. It seems obvious.
Yeah, if you have an increasing population, especially an influx of individuals entering the country outside of traditional legal frameworks, the assumption is that crime must increase proportionally.
Sure.
But the sociological data, aggregated over nearly a century of research, reveals something deeply counterintuitive known as the immigrant paradox.
The immigrant paradox. I love when long-term longitudinal data forces us to completely reevaluate conventional wisdom.
It really does. The paradox is that first-generation immigrants, the individuals who actually physically make the journey across the border, they commit crimes at significantly lower rates than their native-born American peers.
Wait, not equivalent rates. Objectively lower rates.
Much lower. The sources detail a comprehensive thesis by Alec and Ibisek, which analyzes decades of data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, or the NLSY.
Okay.
When tracking behavior over the life course, the data shows that first-generation youth have a mean arrest rate of 1.04. Native-born youth, however, have a mean arrest rate of 1.55.
Wait, really? So the native-born population is roughly 50% more likely to be arrested over their lifetime than the first-generation immigrants who just arrived.
Yes.
What are the sociological mechanisms driving that massive discrepancy?
Well, sociologists point to two primary protective mechanisms.
Okay.
The first is self-selection.
What does that mean?
The individuals who undertake the immense, often physically dangerous effort to uproot their lives and migrate to a new country are, generally speaking, highly motivated.
Ambitious.
Right. They are intensely focused on economic survival or educational advancement.
Makes sense.
Those specific personality traits naturally insulate them from the reckless impulsivity required for street-level criminal behavior.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And the second mechanism?
The second mechanism is a massive, overarching deterrent effect. the absolute terror of deportation.
Oh,
A first-generation immigrant, whether documented or undocumented, operates with the acute awareness that a single formal contact with the police could instantly destroy their entire life's ambition
right.
and result in expulsion. This forces a very strict, cautious, legal orientation.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay.
Because it is incredibly easy to cite a longitudinal survey that started in the late 1970s or 90s. But we are currently looking at a distinctly different reality.
Okay.
The sheer volume and the demographic makeup of the, 2023 and 2024 border crisis is historically unprecedented.
Sure.
Does a paradox based on 20th century migration patterns
Yeah.
actually map onto what is happening right now?
That is the exact question the expert analysis from the Cato Institute aimed to pressure test. To determine if the current influx is driving the current crime wave, we have to look closely at the timeline. The recent undeniable surge in violent crime in America began very specifically around May 2020.
Right. May 2020 was the exact moment the pandemic lockdowns were in full effect, and it also coincided with the massive social unrest following the murder of George Floyd.
Exactly. And what was happening at the border in May 2020?
Well, it was close, right?
Border encounters were at historic multi-year lows. Title 42 had essentially shut down the asylum system, and global movement was paralyzed.
Right.
Yet domestic crime was skyrocketing. Conversely, when border encounters surged to record highs in subsequent years, official domestic crime rates actually began to recede.
Oh, wow.
The temporal data completely divorces the onset of the crime spike from the migrant influx.
So the data strongly suggests that the individuals driving the recent surges in violence are overwhelmingly native-born Americans reacting to domestic systemic breakdowns, not first-generation migrants. But does that immigrant paradox hold up over time? Like, if they stay here, do they remain insulated?
Unfortunately, no. This is the dark side of the sociological data.
Oh, no.
The protective buffer is incredibly fragile, and it almost entirely vanishes by the second generation.
Wait, really?
Yes, the children born in the United States to those immigrant parents do not retain those low crime rates. This process is known as segmented assimilation.
Meaning they successfully assimilate into American culture, but they assimilate into the most disadvantaged, deviant segments of it.
Exactly. The sociological mechanism here is called dissonant acculturation.
Dissonant acculturation.
Yeah. The children adapt to the dominant American culture, the language, the media, the peer networks much faster than their parents do.
Sure.
This creates a severe fracture within the household. The children realize their parents don't fully understand the new cultural landscape, so they push back against their parents' traditional protective controls.
And crucially, they also lose the paralyzing fear of deportation because they have birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
And because new immigrants often face severe economic constraints, they are structurally forced to settle in disadvantaged, high-crime neighborhoods where the rent is actually affordable.
Precisely. The second generation is thrust into those environments without the protective fear their parents had. They are heavily influenced by native-born peer networks, and they rapidly adopt the deviant routines necessary to survive in that specific environment.
Wow.
As a result, the crime rates of the second generation surge to match and sometimes even exceed the arrest rates of the native-born population.
So they are essentially culturally absorbing the American blueprint for crime.
Yes, and the NLSY data tracks the early warning signs of this transition perfectly.
How so?
For a first-generation immigrant, engaging in minor everyday deviance is a massive statistical predictor of future serious legal trouble.
Like what kind of deviance?
For instance, the data calculates an incident rate ratio, an IRR, which is a metric used to compare the relative risk of two different groups.
Like a multiplier for risk.
Exactly. The data shows that a first-generation immigrant who uses marijuana has an IRR of 2.53 for future arrests.
Oh, 2.5 times.
Meaning they're over 2.5 times more likely to face formal arrest later in life compared to an immigrant who doesn't.
Because if a first-generation youth is willing to break the rules on something minor like drug use, they have already shattered that psychological fear of deportation barrier.
Exactly.
They've already initiated the process of dissonant acculturation. The dam is already broken.
Perfectly stated. The protective armor is gone.
So what does this all mean? Which really reframes the entire political narrative.
It really does.
When the public turns on the news and sees a horrifying story about a migrant committing a terrible crime, their brain immediately assumes it is indicative of a broader trend.
Right.
But the macro-level data shows that while those individual cases are tragic, They are statistical outliers. The actual structural risk isn't that migrants are importing higher crime rates into the country. The risk is that migrants are rapidly assimilating into the heavily armed, high-crime culture that we have already built for ourselves.
Which brings us full circle. An increasing population size inherently increases the sheer volume of crime, just by virtue of having more people in the denominator.
Right.
That volume makes the public feel overwhelmed, but attributing the systemic breakdown of public safety to the immigrant population is just statistically backward.
Okay, let's step back and synthesize this entire journey.
Okay.
We set out to understand the massive disconnect between what the public feels and what the spreadsheets say.
Right?
We started by looking at how the algorithms defining judicial ideology as pro-defendant mask the real-world implications of courts that prioritize release over detention.
Yep.
We explored how translating that ideology into policies like Cook County's bail reform can inadvertently result in thousands of extra crimes being absorbed by a community simply through the mathematics of volume versus
The
rate.
temptation error, yeah.
Exactly. We uncovered the terrifying reality of the dark figure of crime, realizing that the vast majority of offenses evaporate before they are ever investigated,
Yeah.
and how police bureaucracies actively juke the stats to meet political demands.
Right.
We watched the collapse of deterrence as clearance rates plummeted, shifting the burden of risk directly onto the law-abiding public. And finally, we dismantled the migrant crime narrative, proving that our newest arrivals are actually our most law-abiding demographic, right up until the moment they tragically assimilate into American deviants.
It represents a profound, multi-layered systemic failure. Not just a failure of the justice system to maintain deterrence, but a failure of the bureaucratic state to accurately measure and report reality.
Yeah.
And that systemic failure raises an important question, one that I think leaves us with a truly provocative implication to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If we logically acknowledge that our official government crime statistics are fundamentally a social construction, if they are actively manipulated by local police chiefs trying to protect their budgets, warped by politicians demanding better headlines, and heavily skewed by a public that is too distrustful to even bother dialing 911, where does that ultimately leave us?
I don't know where.
Are we rapidly approaching a near future where the only crime data that society actually trusts comes from private surveillance and artificial intelligence?
Oh, wow. You mean relying on private home security camera grids, corporate neighborhood watch apps, and AI algorithms scraping social media to track the real-time volume of crime?
Exactly. And if we reach a point where private for-profit tech companies hold the actual accurate high-definition data on how safe our streets are, while the government is left clutching flawed, manually juked spreadsheets.
Who actually controls the architecture of public safety in that society?
Exact.
That is a chilling but entirely logical place to end this conversation. If the government loses the monopoly on truth, they eventually lose the monopoly on security. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Don't forget to look past the pristine spreadsheets, critically question the statistics you see on the evening news, and we will catch you next time.